So everybody, welcome. This is the third installment of our Building Intelligence webinar series, 3 out of 3. So appreciate you guys jumping on. My name is Brad Bassa. I'm the Chief Business Development Officer for Synergy. Flying solo today. Mike Keith, our CEO, has been with us the first couple, but he's busy today. So I'm going to be driving the bus. So hopefully it goes pretty well and you guys get a lot out of this. I'm looking forward to it. A couple of housekeeping things that we're going to get out of the way. As I said, we had the first poll. There's going to be a second one midway through. So if you guys could be kind enough to answer those questions and provide us with some feedback, that'd be great. If there's any technical issues, just throw something in the chat and Cody on our end will hopefully help you address that. I don't think we've really had any so far, so hopefully that continues. And if there's any questions throughout the webinar, throw them in the chat as well too, and we'll get those answered towards the very end as we start wrapping things up. We're going to, as with the other ones, at the end of this, we'll send you an email with a PDF of the presentation, as well as links to the recordings. Since the second one into this third one, we've posted the first and second webinars to our YouTube channel, and I believe there will be a link in the follow-up email you receive after this one to those videos as well too. So if you missed the first two, no big deal. You can go back and watch them. They're not too bad. I think they're about 30-35 minutes long. So pretty easy to get through and some pretty good topics. So I think that's pretty much everything we have for all the, admin housekeeping stuff. So get to the agenda. So a couple things we'll talk about. We'll go through a quick recap of the first two webinars, as I mentioned, and this is kind of a wrap up of those first two, kind of summarizing what we've talked about and applied to this third one. So we're going to talk about, we have data now. What can we do with it? What are the cool things we can do? How can I benefit from it as an engineer, integrator, building operator, facility manager? And then from there, we're going to talk about taking the process to where we want to go in the future, right? So going from being reactive to proactive. So we're not constantly responding to issues and running around, with the building on, quote unquote, on fire, where we're actually heading things off before they become larger issues and being more proactive, which will lead to greater energy efficiencies, operational and maintenance efficiencies, and make us more powerful going forward. And then going into data-driven, there's a couple dots there because we're going to talk about a couple of different things that we can do with data and how we can be more data conscious in the decisions we make with our facilities moving forward. We'll wrap up with a couple of key takeaways, kind of summarize this webinar 3 as well as the 3-part series, talk a little bit about what's next, and then go through questions and comments. So real quick, recap of the first two webinars. So webinar number 1 was doing a very high level overview of intelligent buildings and what they are. If you have one, if you don't, what does it take to have an intelligent building, and the benefits associated with that. So, and again, it was very high level. We wanted to get everybody introduced to ourselves here at Synergy, as well as, do a topic that I think everybody would benefit from, and it wouldn't be too technical in nature for the first one out of the gate. Webinar number 2 kind of took that a little bit further and talked a little bit more in terms of the nuts and bolts of becoming an intelligent facility and what that entails. So we talked about controls and integration, and the sources of data that are going to make our buildings smarter and more intelligent. And then, knowing those sources of data, now how do I go get it? And once I get it, what can I do with it? I can run analytics, I can do fault detection, I can do asset management, I can roll all those things in together to start to make my building a little bit more efficient and intelligent and, and safe. We do a lot of healthcare work, so I'll make them a lot more safe and compliant as well too. So like I said, those webinar links will be, if you go to YouTube and search Synergy Engineering, you can find it, or there'll be a link in the email you receive after this. So go on to the first one. So kind of a bulk of what we're going to talk about here today is, so I have all this data now, what can I do with it? And we're going to talk a lot about commissioning, and there's tremendous amounts of commissioning, different types of commissioning that we can do. And it's all based on when the commissioning is carried out in terms of what we actually call it and what happens during that phase. So at a very high level, in its simplest terms, commissioning is a process that keeps buildings under optimal operating conditions. it's a way to take a baseline and make sure that your building is performing at or better than that baseline moving forward year after year. It's accomplished by comparing actual operation of that facility to a series of predefined metrics. So as you go along, if it's not adhering to those metrics, you're making the necessary corrections when it falls short to bring it back within those guidelines. And commissioning, when we look at, kind of what most people know about commissioning is it's new building commissioning, right? So I'm building a new facility and I have what's called a commissioning agent on board. And what that is that kind of provides total quality assurance. And what we mean by that is a commissioning agent is the owner's eyes and ears on a project. They respond and report back to the owner and the owner only. They are an advocate of the building owner and that facility owner. So what they're doing from the design process all the way into construction, through construction, into the acceptance phase, and through the warranty period, is they're making sure that what has been designed, sold, promised is actually being put into that facility, and that facility is going to be efficient per those sets of guidelines, those predefined metrics moving forward. Some of the essential attributes of a commissioning agent are they define the commissioning process. They make the final recommendations to the owner in terms of the functional performance of all those systems within the building. They're involved, the earlier you can get a commissioning agent on board, the better, because they can be involved in the design process, review design documents, review submittals, along with the different other stakeholders in that process, whether it be the contractors, the CMs, things like that. And as I said before, the commissioning agent is the objective, independent advocate of the owner. The owner can't be everywhere. They don't have the technical expertise that, a commissioning agent would have in terms of the engineering, the architectural work, and things like that. So they need somebody that is not driven by the bids and the constraints that some of the construction team are dealing with. The commissioning agent is solely focused on what's best for the owner, and that's done through hands-on field experience that the CX agent provides. It starts very early on with defining the scope and the OPR. So many of you have probably heard OPR referenced before. That stands for Owner's Project Requirements. So that's sitting down with the owner and saying, what do you want out of your facility? How do you want it to function? How efficient do you want it to be? Where can we make concessions if we need to? What's important, and develop a list of what that owner is expecting out of his investment. The assets, all things like that. And then the agent takes that OPR and starts developing the commissioning process and defines the roles and responsibilities of everybody involved, from the contractors, how they're reporting their testing, how they're reporting the installation, the functional performance of all those pieces of equipment, how that's brought, how it's reported, and how that commissioning agent takes that information and gives it back to the owner and drives the construction process to make sure that as systems are coming online, they're being commissioned correctly, they're functioning properly, and they're adhering to that OPR that we talked about. That's kind of the one real big thing that the commissioning agent is responsible for, is that reporting, because as I said, they're the eyes and ears of that of the owner moving forward, and what he's reporting back to the owner is critical in terms of managing the owner's expectations and the actual project itself. So how does that all apply to data? What we're seeing now with data is we can now start to use data and information within buildings, whether it's an existing building, whether it's a new building, to make that commissioning process a lot better. And we can do a lot more with less. Commissioning plays a critical role in ensuring the success of your project. As I said before, it assures the owner that what is being delivered matches the original agreement and is what they're paying for. So proper commissioning equates to more energy efficient systems, lower operating costs, lower maintenance costs. It ends up being a very high rate of return, and the payback period is usually less than a year, because commissioning mainly consists of inspection, analysis, adjustments, low cost repairs, and things like that. Because fixing performance issues during the design and construction phase is much cheaper than modifying it once it's completed and already active. So again, it goes to being, as I stated before, that we'll get into a little bit more, being proactive rather than reactive. It helps with risk management as well too. And corrects problems that would eventually surface down the road. It's taking a look at them and finding them earlier before they could become actually far more costly maintenance issues. So with increased data and trending capabilities that we have now, as I said, we can do much more with less, and we can start to develop our baseline very, very early on and start to benchmark the performance of the facilities well before, as it's being constructed, into the occupancy phase, and then from there on. So it allows us to show more of the performance of that building over the course of its life. It also allows us to start testing at any point in time. A lot of times we see commissioning agents, they go in, or if it's self-performed commissioning through the contractors, per the contract, it's you have to test this piece of equipment at one point in time, and they say it passed, they walk away, and that's it. They don't have to test it anymore. Meanwhile, a week later, a month later, as things in that building change, the performance of that asset might change as well too. So what data analytics and fault detection and proper asset management allow us to do, it gives us a stream that we can now start testing those systems, not only test them, but keep a record of them from any point in time from the minute that system or that asset comes online. So it makes it much more powerful to hold people accountable and to make sure that we're getting what was designed and what was paid for. And also, and probably the strongest point for that type of having the data that we're going to have in terms of metering and analytics and fault detection is we can now test systems rather than individual pieces of equipment. So, having trend data of every single point within that system and every single temp sensor and flow meter and pressure sensor is extremely powerful when we can look at systems and how they interact with each other. Our parts and pieces interact as a system and how those systems interact with other systems. When we look at testing a VAV, we're no longer just testing the performance of that VAV. Hey, is the damper stroking okay? Is the hot water valve opening and closing as it should? And then we walk away. That VAV box is being served by an air handling unit. It's also being served by a boiler. And that air handler is being served by a chiller and a boiler. So those things are all interconnected and work as a system. So with data and with the trending capabilities that we have now moving forward, we can now test and show the functional performance of those pieces of equipment, how they're going to perform as a system, which is how they're going to perform during the life of their building. You're not just going to go in and say, oh, this VAV box is fine on its own. I don't care what its air handler's doing. That's never the case. And that's usually what we see happening when we go into older buildings, is that over time, overrides are put in place and they start siloing types of equipment rather than, looking at issues as part of a system. They're looking at as an individual problem. So what this data allows us to do is move forward. And like I said, do a lot more with a lot less, because we have a tremendous amount of data and information at our fingertips to become more efficient and better. So what we have on here, what types of commissioning, and analytic can I apply analytics in my data to? I mentioned earlier that depending on when commissioning is carried out and the existing building conditions at the time it's carried out, we have different names for different types of commissioning. So I kind of talked a little bit about new building commissioning. That's, from womb to tomb type stuff, where we're going from the design process through construction into the occupancy and then the warranty phase. Recommissioning applies to buildings that are commissioned at regular intervals. So this kind of has different names. It's recommissioning. It's also kind of called continuous commissioning, ongoing commissioning. But it's normally a process that's similar to, simpler than new building commissioning or retro commissioning, because it's just a constant process, or a process that's done at regular intervals. So every year, every other year, you're not allowing that building to drift too far from its baseline and from its standard operating conditions. You're recommissioning it at different intervals and keeping it, as it moves out, as it drifts, you're moving it back in. Retro commissioning, which is very, very popular. It's very prevalent in our industry, especially now as people are becoming more energy conscious and conscious of the life of their assets as they're moving forward. And it kind of applies to buildings that really haven't been commissioned before. They might have been commissioned very early on, or some form of commissioning when they were opened. But then nothing was done. The building's just up and operating. The facility maintenance staff is running that building, and not saying they're running it bad, but equipment fails, equipment ages, renovations take place, parts and pieces of those systems are moved around, and it hasn't been recommissioned and brought back into its baseline, or new baselines haven't been developed as things have changed. So what we're doing now is we're using a lot of that data to go back in and say, okay, here's where it was designed, here's how it's operating, and now how do we merge those two and develop a more efficient building moving forward? And then we get into, I'll jump around here, we get into integrated measurement and verification. This is extremely important as we start to, there's develop and put energy conservation measures, or ECMs, within buildings. If there's a lighting retrofit, if somebody comes in and is putting in LEDs across their facility, they want to be able to quantify the precise impact of that measure, whether it be sequence of operation changes or other types of ECMs. On the performance side, that owner or that facility manager wants to know that what he's doing is actually having a good impact. So when we have that measurement and verification, that's what we're talking about. We're using that data to say, hey, here's where I was before, here's where I am now, I'm instituting this ECM, and here's where I hope to be in the future. And I can start to verify that to say the changes and the decisions I'm making are having a positive or a negative impact. Not all ECMs or not all changes are going to have a positive impact. We're going to see different outcomes, but that's good. It allows you to see what works and what doesn't. And then also with the measurement and verification, which we'll get into a little bit more in terms of data-driven designs, is it allows us to give a deeper comprehensive look into projects and how we're deploying them and their performance, and developing ROIs, or a rate of return on those types, a return on investment on those projects. So, we have the data to back up our decisions. If we're going to go to our leadership and say, hey, I have this project that I want to do, and it's going to save us X amount of dollars in energy, X amount of dollars in operations and maintenance, the measurement and verification and the data that we have available allows us to prove those claims out to our leadership to say, hey, this was a good decision. We need to do more of this moving forward. So, the next one is monitor-based commissioning. And that's kind of, one of the big things I wanted to talk about in terms of what we can do with data now is we can now, be proactive. I said it earlier, we want to leverage our analytics, our fault detection, our meters, the people within our building now that are more educated and more technical and know more about their buildings. We want to leverage that and start to be proactive, where we're not waiting for things to fail, or we're not chasing our tails, trying to fix problems within our building. We're starting to head those things off before they become issues. And when we do that, yes, we save energy, and saving energy is great, but we also have operational maintenance. We can become more efficient in what we're doing in our building in terms of maintaining it. If we're not constantly out, trying to solve issues that have become problems, when we're out doing that, we're not, making our building cleaner, more safe, more compliant, more efficient. So it allows the facilities operation team to get a little bit more time back in their day to attack things that are going to be more beneficial to the life of that building and the success of that building. So monitor-based commissioning and analytics, it allows really a deep dive understanding of all building performance in real time. So as I said before, we're not looking at one piece of equipment and not systems. With our technology now, we can trend everything, at different intervals throughout the day, whether it be 15 minutes, an hour, but we constantly have eyes on all those systems. So when a problem arises, we can not only see that, okay, we found something happening, we can go back and see when that started, because a lot of times problems don't become problems right as soon as they happen. They've been happening for a long time, and they start to snowball, and all of a sudden it becomes a larger issue. So what our analytics and fault detection allows us to do is to see and start to see how assets are performing, how systems are performing, and if they're if they're becoming less efficient, if they're falling off. It might just be that they're getting old, or maybe they're not, the sequence has changed and they're not being run efficiently. It allows us to head a lot of those problems off, as well as develop a root cause analysis. So it saves operational maintenance time rather than having to spend a day to go diagnose a system. Through our data now, we can start to see where that problem developed and start to pinpoint where that maintenance should be applied. So again, we're gaining efficiencies in time and effort just by not spending and wasting time running around trying to find out what caused the problem, where we can actually very quickly and very easily, in a lot of cases, it will actually tell us what the root cause is. So it's more directive and more proactive in terms of where we need to go fix our issues. And with that, it makes our systems just more responsive, more efficient. because we're not just putting overrides in to fix Band-Aids. We're actually solving problems that allow the systems to operate as a whole and together and more efficient. I said energy is great. It's not the only thing, but it allows us to do a lot of cool stuff. We can integrate our meters, to our building automation system. So we can now track the system performance, track it right over top and overlay it with our energy consumption. So it allows us to monitor our energy use more efficiently. And as I said, earlier, it allows us to see how we're spending energy with some of the conservation measures and things like that we're using in our building moving forward. Are we doing good? Is the sequence of operation I changed, is that having a good impact on my energy usage? Maybe it's not. Maybe it's baseline, but you're getting more comfort in the building. So it's kind of a wash to say, hey, I'm gonna spend a little bit more money on my energy, but I'm gonna get more comfort and safety and compliance out of my building, which is going to lead to less cold calls, less issues from people, and therefore increase your operational and maintenance efficiency. So, monitor-based commissioning is really the future in terms of what we're trying to do with data, where, we're not waiting for a building to be out of spec or out of that baseline for so long. The minute it drifts, the minute it moves over, we're able to see it, spot it, find the root cause, and move it back in. And that just creates so many efficiencies across, so many different levels in that facility. And I think one of the last things, I mentioned a little bit is compliance. We do a lot in healthcare. Hospitals have, authorities that they need to report to and show that they're being compliant with our codes and standards to keep patients safe, the workers safe, and things like that. And obviously with the pandemic, that's even more important than it was before. So having this data at our fingertips allows that facility to be more accurate and transparent in terms of how their building's performing. Is it compliant? Is it not? If it's not compliant, why isn't it? I mean, we shouldn't fear that. We should want to make sure that if we have issues with our compliance, if we have issues with the systems that are there to protect the patients and staff in those buildings, or even in office buildings, right? We want to make sure that the air is filtered correctly and we don't have people getting sick in these buildings and transferring illnesses back and forth to each other. We should want to know that. And the data can really help us know that in real time. We don't have to wait for somebody to get sick. We don't have to wait for issues to arise. We can really start to see how our buildings, I always say they're living and breathing entities, right? Literally, they pull air in, they exhaust air out, and it's something that we should, this data now allows us to be on top of that, kind of like your little Fitbit and fitness tracker on your wrist that gives you in real time what you're up to. Our monitor-based commissioning is giving us that same kind of feedback. So there's more. So we were talking about commissioning. There was a lot on commissioning. Hopefully you guys got through that okay. But what else can we use data to do? Rather than just doing monitor-based real-time commissioning, we want to use it and make it even more powerful. So we talk about data-driven design. It's kind of one of the bigger things we're looking at. So if I'm a facility owner, a building owner, facility manager, and I want to do work in my building, I want to add, I have an addition coming on, or I'm adding a portion to that hospital, or doing some work to my ORs, or I'm upgrading a chilled water plant. I want to know if I have data and I have metered data and I have baseline and benchmarks, my design becomes so much more powerful moving forward. Because you have information and data that you can hand off to the engineer doing the job that he would either have to go get on his own, spend time and money to do that, or have to estimate a lot of that, whether through load programs or things like that. They would have to just do best practices and not actually know what's happening in that building. With data now within your building, all those renovation projects, all the design projects moving forward become much more efficient and much more accurate, because we're really taking the guesswork out of the design of these buildings. We have historical data that can show you 3 or 4 years worth of chilled water performance of your facility to say, hey, normally somebody might come in and say, well, you need to upgrade your chiller, or you need to put in a new chiller, or things like that. Well, if you have 3-4 years worth of chilled water data on that plant, you can say, no, I have plenty of capacity on my system. So, now you've eliminated a piece of equipment that you would have spent money for, had to maintain, things like that, where now you can instruct that engineer, that designer, to say, hey, here's my data, go off of this. It's accurate. It's reflective of the processes that are happening within my facility. It's not what people think is happening in the facility. This is the actual data of how my building is performing. And that's extremely powerful moving forward. It really is a cost and efficiency savings, as you're designing buildings and as you're upgrading and making your buildings more intelligent, as we say, moving forward. It really is a powerful X factor to have. So you're not reinventing the wheel every time you have somebody come out to do work in your building. We talk about capital planning. This is big. I mean, especially in the healthcare industry, leadership is asking facilities to do more with less. There's less employees, there's less resources. So having a good capital plan is essential, so that these facilities each year, as they get money, they're spending that money wisely and they're getting the most bang for their buck. Data-driven design and analytics allows us to put power behind our capital planning and say, we have data, we know our building is operating at this level. If we install, the money I'm asking for is X. And when you give me that money, once it's installed and up and running, where my building it was at before, it's now going to be down here. It's going to have energy savings. It's going to have operational savings associated with it. So being able to M&V that data and develop your capital plan based on solid information rather than just guesswork is going to make those capital plans that much more powerful. And what we've seen in the past too is that if you can prove that the money you're asking for is being put to good use and you're showing a return on investment to your leadership, we've seen it in the past that leadership is more apt to give you more money in the future, because you've proven that you've spent it wisely and you can actually prove the return on investment of that. And that's tremendously powerful, where you're not just constantly asking for money and chasing your tail and just using that money to repair things. You're actually taking that capital and making your building better and more efficient, which extends the life of the building, extends the life of the assets within that building, which leads into the next one, proper asset management. As I said, money's tight, and we're expecting our equipment and our systems to last even longer. So how do you do that? You need to operate it more efficiently. You can't just run the guts out of stuff with Band-Aid overrides and things like that. We need to use our data to make better decisions to extend the life of our assets and make them more efficient. If you have an air handler that's expected to last 20, 25 years, but it's not running properly, the sequences aren't programmed properly, and it's never been operating the way it was designed to, then that 20 to 25 years becomes 10, 15 years. And then your building is expecting to now invest money in a new asset that it wasn't expecting to do for another 5 or 10 years. And that has huge impacts on the bottom line of that hospital. And the longer and the better we can use our data to not only operate our equipment, but track its life and to say, hey, its efficiency is maintaining over these years. It's great. What are we doing well? Let's keep doing that. Or we can start to plan to say, hey, I think we got another 5 years left on this. Well, let's start looking at how we need to fund that project 5 years from now. Let's start looking at that now. Let's not wait till it fails and I have to do something on an emergency basis and it's going to cost me 10 times as much to do it. Let's start planning for it now. And that's what our data allows us to do, is to really start to be, again, that word, proactive in what we're doing across our building, not just proactive with what's happening right now, but let's be proactive in how we're going to invest in our assets moving forward. And the last one on there is kind of touched on it a few times already. Return on investment. It's extremely important. If we're going to look and ask our leadership for more money, we better be able to prove that we're using it wisely, and that what we're doing now is going to benefit us not only in the short term, but in the long term as well too. And we're not only going to pay that back, in the first couple of years, we're going to continue to improve on that ROI, because we're going to use our data over the life of that asset to manage it, operate it correctly, and allow us to get every last dollar out of that piece of equipment, because we're running it efficiently, and we're not running it into the ground and have to ask for more money earlier than we're expecting. So the data is great because it allows us to ask for that money correctly and then prove it on the back end as well too, when we said, with that measurement and verification. So it helps us to prove our decisions and show that we were doing a good job. And on the other side of it too, a lot, sometimes it's going to prove that it wasn't the right decision, right? I mean, sometimes it'll say, hey, we gained some efficiencies here, but we lost some energy over here. Didn't really improve comfort that well. So, if it's something, an office renovation or things like that, it's lessons learned. At least it's data. All data, in my opinion, can be good data. It's going to either tell a good story or tell a bad story. And there's a lot to be gained on those bad stories, right? It allows us to plan for the future and become better moving forward as well. So kind of threw a lot out there, but what we're looking here, a key takeaways not only from this webinar, but overall in terms of building intelligence is what we want to do it's more of an education to say, hey, having an intelligent building, an intelligent facility, an intelligent operational and maintenance staff, giving them the tools they need to succeed is not going away. I mean, it's something that is here to stay. And because like I said, everybody's looking to do more with less, and the longer that they can extend their assets and make their buildings more efficient, people want to do those types of projects. They want to give their team those tools in order to be successful to do that. So that's what we're saying. Our key takeaway from this one is we have the data. Now I got to go do something with it. I think we said very early on in one of the first episodes that the value is not in the data. The value is in what you do with the data. You can get all great things. Your computer and analytics can tell you, the absolute best way to operate something. But if you don't go implement the changes that are being recommended by those analytics, nothing's going to happen, right? So we just need to be aware that all the stuff that we're talking about with data, our asset management, our maintenance management system, our BAS systems, how we integrate to them, those are all just tools. They're tools that help us make our buildings more efficient. But at the end of the day, somebody has to go do something with all that data and be proactive. So, as I said, it's just a tool in our toolbox. We went over all the different types of commissioning activities that we can apply analytics to, which is basically everything. Again, the more data, the more insight, the more vision we have into the processes that we're doing, it makes us more powerful and makes us more efficient. We could do, years ago when we would commission a building, a lot of times the OPR was written saying you need to commission and test 5-10% of the VAV boxes in this building. If you have 1,000 VAV boxes in your building, you're really not testing a whole lot of those pieces of equipment. Now with analytics, in basically the same time or even less, we can test and commission all 1,000 of those boxes and give a holistic view of how that building is performing and how it's going to function moving forward. And then again, data drives better decisions. The more we have to work with, the more informed our decisions are, the better off we're going to be. We're not just throwing darts at a dartboard in the dark. We're able to actually see what we want to do. We have the data that's telling us what we need to do. And then when we do it, we have that data on the back end to prove that the decision we made was the right one. So it makes everybody more powerful. It makes the buildings more efficient. It makes the engineers, your designers, everybody more efficient moving forward. So data is not just, the computer screens and the analytics and things like that. It could be as simple as an up-to-date riser diagram. We talked about this in the past, just some of the very simple things. BAS architecture, zone drawings, that type of stuff is data as well too. And it can all make us more efficient and allows us to make better decisions moving forward. So to kind of wrap up this webinar and kind of the series as a whole, we have on there, Let's Talk. If you have any other questions in terms of what we've talked about here or what we do at Synergy in terms of how we fit into, the built environment in our industry, take a trip over to our website. We have a lot of information there, and there's a way for you to get in touch with us on that website if you have even more questions or have any more specific things you want to talk about. So please do that. As we said, there's going to be email with the webinar PDF after this to all of those who signed up, and that will have links to the first 2 webinars in there as well too. And then we're looking at our next webinar. We're looking at topics in terms of our facility intelligence group and looking a little bit more in terms of getting a little bit even more into the details in terms of looking at all this data, commissioning, monitor-based commissioning, and what that looks like for a facility operator, what he would be seeing on a daily basis, and how he would go about taking those analytics and showing the value of them and doing something with them. So probably that'll happen in the late August, maybe September timeframe, but we'll do it like as we did before. We'll post on LinkedIn, and hopefully you guys will check that out as well too. So if there's anything, Tanis, I don't know if there's any questions or comments moving forward so we can get wrapped up and get people going.
I think we're good with questions. If you want to share the poll results, we can go over that real quick.
Cody, is that you? Cool.
Should be shared now.
Yep. So yeah, so I see, types of commissioning that new building commissioning. New building commissioning is kind of a select group. There's a lot of people that say they can do it. I think there's probably only, a good percentage that do it very well. I think the wheelhouse now that we're seeing in our industry is what's shown here, right? Retro commissioning, ongoing commissioning, and monitor-based commissioning, which are different, but they all have a lot of similarities in terms of what we're trying to do. And that's trying to go into an existing building and make it better, or a new building, not only make it better, but continue to make it better through the life of it. So not allowing it to drift and allowing it to be as efficient as possible moving forward. So thanks for all that responded to that one. So yeah, if there's no other questions, we appreciate you guys jumping on today. It's great to, like I said, this is our third one, so hopefully we're getting better and better at it. But if there's any other comments, like I said, go to our website, get in touch with us, let us know, and we'll look for you on the next one. So thank you everybody for attending. We really appreciate it.